All right, good morning. I don't know if you noticed or not, but I'm not Wade. I'm not tall enough. I got a little more hair. I'm not Wade. Not hair up here. I don't want him to hear that. That might be bad. You might not see me next weekend. Who knows? No. Wade is not with us this morning. He is, along with a couple other members of the church, are in the 100-mile wilderness up in the northeastern United States. So they're gone up there hiking. I don't think that they have any cell reception, so I don't even think they're joining us via the internet this morning, but I'll ask that you be in prayer for them. It's Wade, Scott Ford, and Todd Clay this morning. Be in prayer for them as they make that journey and then make their way back home. So I'm not Wade, but I am Stephen Ingram. I'm the pastor of students and missions here at Grace, and I'm just really glad that you're here this morning. There's all kinds of reasons not to be here on a holiday weekend like this, so I'm really grateful that you decided to join us this morning. This morning we're going to be working from a passage in the Gospel of John. So if you have your Bibles and you'd like to turn to it, it's John chapter 4. And we're going to skip around a little bit in the passage. It's a text that you're really familiar with. Whether you grew up churched or not, you probably have heard this text. It's one of those really familiar ones. And it's John chapter 4, verses 7 through 19 to begin with. So I'll invite you to read along with me. A Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." You see, his disciples had gone to the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria?" Because Jews did not share things in common with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that's saying this to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have no bucket, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us the well, and his sons and his flocks who drank from it?" Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but those who drink of the water that I will give them will never be thirsty. The water that I will give will become in them a spring of water gushing up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I may never be thirsty or have to keep coming to draw water here." And Jesus said to her, "Go and call your husband and come back." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." And then Jesus replied to her, "You're right in saying I have no husband. For you've had 5 husbands, and the one that you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I see that you are a prophet." And then we're going to skip over to verse 28. Then the woman left her water jug and went back to the city. She said to the people, "Come and see the man who told me everything I have ever done. He cannot be the Messiah, can he?" They left the city and were on their way to him. So this morning we're continuing our series as we go through the gospel according to Ted. If you've not been with us, the idea is that we find these beautiful eternal truths in TED Talks out there just in the world, bringing goodness and light to the world around us. And so we decided to take some of these TED Talks and bring them into the pulpit and talk about these eternal truths, both from the angle of the TED Talk and the angle of faith. And so this morning, we're going to be talking about the power of vulnerability. And I want to start off, when we think about vulnerability, if you have children, I know for me, my mind goes straight to my kids. When I think about vulnerability, both of a child and of myself as a parent. And I remember we had just moved back to Birmingham from Atlanta. And my oldest daughter, we have 3 kids, Mary Claire, who's 13, Patrick, who's 11, and Nora Grace, who's 7. And Mary Claire was about 2.5 years old. She was our firstborn, daddy's little girl. And she had one of those stomach viruses. You know the kind. They really, really get adults, but they just decimate little kids, especially infants. And I remember she'd been sick several times over the course of a few hours. And I remember holding her Even now, you get the emotion just thinking about it. And I remember holding her in her weak, limp, pale little body. And I looked down at her, and she looked up, and she mustered a smile. And those big, bright blue eyes and that pale porcelain face looked up at me, and I was overwhelmed with love. And I looked down at her, and I'm about to say, I love you, to her. And right as I get to the O in love, you see what your mouth does there, she projectile vomits in my mouth and all over my clothes. I know some of you are ready to leave now. You've gotten about all you can handle. You thought that was going to be a story about the vulnerability of a child and this sweet, and she's going to say, oh, I love you back. But she puked all over me, basically, right? I tell you that story because I guarantee you a lot of us have had that exact same thing happen, maybe not with a child, but you're standing in line at Target, and you've been there a little too long, and you feel like you have to make conversation with the person behind you, and so you say, hey, how's your day been? And an hour and a half later, you're in the parking lot still hearing how their day has been. A lot of us have those situations with vulnerability where when we do it, a lot of times we regret that we've done it. Other people can liken vulnerability to leaving to go away on a vacation, a long, week-long vacation, and putting a sign in the front of your yard that says, we're gone for vacation. The doors are unlocked. The security system is off. And the dog's name is Fido, and he likes the treats that are on the counter. A lot of us have this feeling that if I'm vulnerable, if I open myself up, if I let myself be known, it's just the same as leaving my house unlocked so that someone can come in and take and plunder the most valuable things right out from under me. A third scenario. This is a completely theoretical scenario, by the way, one that has no possibility of happening in real life. Imagine a young minister showing up to a church he's only been at for about 3 months. And he shows up and he is preaching his first sermon at that church that morning. And it's been a long weekend full of football and having friends and family over. And he gets to the church already kind of tired and shows up to print his sermon because he had made a couple of tweaks that morning and the printer is down. And so he's scrambling around trying to write the sermon on a pad, trying to get it something just so he can speak to the people who he's never spoken to before. And then about 10 minutes before it's time to preach, the printer miraculously comes back online. The sermon's printed, and yet he still hasn't had his coffee or donut for the morning. Now, that's a completely theoretical situation. But we all experience vulnerability, and oftentimes at the very worst moments. Rarely do we ever talk about this word vulnerability and say, yeah, give me more of that. We never get excited when we talk about vulnerability because it means we're exposed and we're open. I don't know if you have had the distinct pleasure of watching daytime television anytime recently, but in between commercials at the Price is Right, you would literally think that you and our country and everyone you know and love is under attack. Whether it's under attack by bed bugs or national security or that you need new insurance or that your identity is going to be stolen. It feels like we are constantly being told, be fearful, protect the things you value and the things that you love. Because if you don't build up walls of security and protection around everything you value, you will lose it. We live in the wealthiest country in the world, and 52% of our budget is earmarked for defense. It is our American way. We have been steeped in this idea of security and protection. Because the only way to stay happy, the only way to have peace, the only way to keep joy is to protect those things at all costs. This morning, we're going to be hearing from a woman named Brené Brown. She's actually Dr. Brené Brown, but I've never heard anyone call her Dr. Brené Brown. But Brené Brown is the endowed chair oh my goodness, what is she the endowed chair of? She's the endowed chair of social work at the University of Houston. But nobody cares about that. What people care about is Brené's TED Talk, which we're going to watch some of this morning, and the 5 New York Times best-selling books that she has written. Brené is a prolific voice, one of the most renowned and sought-out speakers in our country. And this morning, we're going to listen to her very first TED Talk. This is what put her on the scene back in 2010 at TEDx Houston. In essence, Brené is saying that the reason why we do not have happiness and peace and joy is because we are so busy building up walls against our vulnerabilities to protect those things that we miss out on them altogether. And this is a radically counterintuitive, countercultural message. It goes against everything we've been taught. It goes against everything that we believe because, again, we've been taught, keep the other out, protect our borders, protect our homes, protect our children, protect our investments in our health and the environment in our lives. At all costs, protect and secure those things that are valuable to us. And while we can argue that entire industries have been built off of this idea of security and protection, none has a greater power and a greater influence in our lives than the idea of protecting against vulnerability in our own personal lives. Whether it's the fear of not being enough, losing love, experiencing rejection or betrayal, or just abandonment. We all build up these walls, we build up these security systems because we know how vulnerable we are to those things. And we know that if we lose those things, if we experience that rejection, that vulnerability, and we have, and when you have experienced it, you tend to build the wall higher. You tend to invest in the bigger security system. You tend to protect yourself even more because the pain is so severe and so intense. We never want to experience it again. And instead of allowing these fears to cripple us, what we do is we create coping mechanisms. Instead of letting these fears immobilize us, we create workarounds. We create systems in our lives that will not allow people to get too close. Because if they get too close, they're going to know who we are. But if we can keep them just at arm's distance, maybe we can protect that deepest of treasure, our personal integrity. So Brené, in her talk, and I hope I'll encourage you, if you get a chance, go and listen to her whole talk, because it really is phenomenal. But Brené hits on a few of these coping mechanisms. And the first one is this coping mechanism that we numb vulnerability. She talks about that we numb vulnerability with food, with debt, with shopping, with addictions, and with medication. We work to numb this fear, this pain, this insecurity, and this sadness in hopes that we will be able to only feel the happiness and the joy in our lives. We are an insulated people, and we insulate ourselves with these things. And the problem is that we live with this idea, we live under this impression that if we can eliminate the pain, if we can eliminate the situations in our lives that hurt, if we can get rid of fear, if we can get rid of that vulnerability, then all we'll experience is happiness and joy and peace. But what we know, both through research and anecdotally, we know that that is not how we as humans work. We are bad. We are horrible at segmenting and compartmentalizing our lives. We do a horrible job of this. And the reason why is because when we eliminate the fear and the pain, we can't fully experience joy and peace. Hear that. When you eliminate, when I try to buffer, when I try to get rid of these vulnerabilities to pain and fear, I dull my ability to experience happiness and joy and peace. That's because both of these things are an intricately connected part of the human experience. And when we cut off half, we cut off half of who we are. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Inside Out. If you haven't, I'm not going to spoil it. But the key is you got to have happiness and sadness to be whole. If you haven't seen it, go watch it this afternoon. It's probably one of the greatest parenting movies you'll ever watch. Trust me on this. It is absolutely beautiful and brilliant. But pain and joy, they're a package deal if we want to be fully human. Another coping mechanism that Brené talks about is making certain those things that are uncertain. This is why religious fundamentalism is such a dangerous phenomenon, both in our country and our world. The whole point of this idea of Christian faith is the faith piece of it. It's the fact that we can't know some of this stuff. It's the fact that we can't prove some of this stuff. Yet there are people who live their entire lives and make millions of dollars by standing there and beating people to death with the Bible. Beating people with a certainty that what they are saying is 100% true, and what those people are doing or what those people are saying is 100% wrong. Sure, we can believe things. Sure, we can have, we can stand on things that we believe in. I hope you do those things. But anytime that we pretend to be 100% certain about this thing called faith, we put ourselves in the place of God, not in the place of man. The only entity that can know for certain all of this faith stuff is not in this room in physical form. It's not you and it's not I. And so when we try to make certain things that are uncertain, what we do is we show our own vulnerability. We show our own fear. I promise you, those people who are screaming on the street corners, who are beating people to death with their words and their Bibles, and sometimes literally, they are so scared. They are so fearful. And they believe down in their heart, if I can just scream this loud enough, if I can just convince enough people that what I'm saying is true, then maybe I can believe that it's true as well. And so we hurt others because we ourselves hurt. And then lastly, Brené talks about the coping mechanism of perfecting, or giving the image of perfection. Perfection in our looks, our body, our children, our home, our marriage, our car, our job, or whatever else we can build little golden idols out of. Again, these coping mechanisms are based out of fear. These coping mechanisms are based out of fear, and this fear has been compounded and turned into an arms race by the likeness of Instagram and Facebook. We flip through our feeds, we swipe, and we see these beautiful people in their beautiful houses with their beautiful families, on their beautiful vacations, with their beautiful dog, on their beautiful boat, on the beautiful lake at the beautiful sunset. And we see this day in and day out, and we look, and there are Cheetos on the floor again. And the dog has torn up a pillow from the couch again. And our kids don't look like those kids. Those kids are 10, and they're airbrushed, and their hair is flowing. And we have these images that are constantly being put into our head, thinking that that's the norm, that's the standard. And so what do? We build the wall, and we perfect, and we give the image of perfection. It used to be that keeping up with the Joneses meant that when our neighbors got a new Chevrolet, it was time to go to the dealership and get an upgrade on the car. Now we are literally trying to keep up with the Kardashians. We are literally seeing people whose lifestyles are so lavish, so insane, jet-setting all over the world, eating the best food, drinking the best drinks, hanging out with all the coolest people. And these images and these messages are constantly being put into us, whether we realize it or not, and we're constantly upping this perfection game, building tiny golden idols out of our severely imperfect lives. Now, what happens is most of us get beyond that. I hope nobody in here is still trying to keep up with the Kardashians, okay? I hope you're not even watching that show. If you do, I'm judging you a little bit, but I love you, okay? But here's what we do, though. We flip to the other side of reality TV, which, by the way, no reality TV is real. You know that, right? Okay, good. If you learned nothing else today, make sure you take that with you. But we flip to the other side of reality TV, and we flip to a fun little channel called TLC. I don't know if you've ever been up late at night and just flipping through the channels and you get stuck on TLC. I used to travel for my job, and pretty much every Monday through Wednesday I was in a different city, sitting in a different hotel room by myself, missing my family, missing my house, missing my bed. And I'd be flipping through the channels, and all of a sudden my 800-pound life would appear on the television. And I'd go, well, that's interesting. I'd watch it, and 6 hours later, I'm still watching it. Or my strange addiction would pop up, and I would learn that there are people with a Lent eating addiction, and when their kids go to bed, they go into the dryer and they eat Lent. And I'm sitting there alone and sad and missing my family and feeling like, man, my life's out of whack. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, well, I don't eat Lent at midnight while my kids are in bed, and I'm not where I want to be, but I can get out of my bed, so I might be okay. And we do this with reality TV. When we get away from trying to be the Kardashians, we get into the mode of, well, at least I'm not them. And it's a coping mechanism that, even if it doesn't make us feel perfect, it makes us feel a little more perfect than someone else. Enter the woman at the well. On the surface, this is, like I said, a story that we've heard many times, a story we're familiar with, a story that is really a beautiful story. You have this woman, she's vulnerable. She has all these things that are going on. Jesus loves her. Her village is saved. Go Jesus, yay team, right? But if we go one step below the surface, we realize that there is more pain and heartache that this woman is dealing with than we could even imagine. I mean, this is a first century story, so we know that just her being a woman in the first century is already 2 strikes against her. We know that being a woman in the first century, you were seen as just a little bit above livestock in terms of your value, and any value that you had was assigned to you by what man you were connected to. That was generally your father or your husband. So just out of the gate, she is a woman in the first century. She already has 2 strikes against her. Then the story tells us that this woman was at the well at midday. Now this, again, if you're not looking deeper, this just feels like another detail to the story. But by her being alone at the well at midday, we're hearing 2 really important things. One, the rhythm of a first century Jewish village was you would go and do the hard work. You would go and haul the water either early in the morning or late in the evening. That way you could avoid the midday sun. It is brutal over there. And so you'd go early in the morning or late in the evening. So the first thing we know about this woman is that she's not in rhythm with the rest of her village. She's shunned. She's been pushed out. She is not invited to walk and talk and be with the people in the morning or in the afternoon. And not only is she out of rhythm with her village and shunned, she's also alone. She didn't have a friend that came with her. She didn't have a friend who said, I'll walk with you, it's okay. I'll go and be with you. Jesus knew these things. Then Jesus pulls a real jerk move. He says, well, go get your husband. Knowing good and well she didn't have a husband. She says, well, I don't have a husband. And he says, yeah, you're right. You've had 5. And not only have you had 5, the guy you're living with now, yeah, he's not even your husband. Which takes us deeper into this woman's story. Because this woman, she could not divorce these men. They were leaving her. They were divorcing her. And each time they divorced her, each time they left, they stripped away another level of worth, another level of dignity, and put on her another layer of shame. So for Jesus to point this out, it just feels callous and cold. If one of you were to come up to myself or Wade or Dixie and say, hey, kind of having a hard time, and if I knew what was going on with you and I just laid it all out, you should fire me, because that is bad pastoral care. But it's exactly what Jesus does in this passage. But here's the difference. Jesus knew these things, and he made these things vulnerable. He exposed her. But just by being there when she was, as who she was telling him half of the story. I don't think she was telling him voluntarily, but part of who she was coming out. And then he goes ahead and lays open the rest of her story, leaving her incredibly exposed. But he didn't do it as a gateway to more shame and more rejection, but as a gateway to being known, fully known, and accepted. See, this is the key. Once we experience the release of being fully known without experiencing rejection, but rather more completely embraced because of it, it changes our entire world. It moves us from these hollow, projected shells of people into actual life and life more abundant. Brené closes her talk by telling us what happens in these moments of full exposure, of real vulnerability, and real knowledge. Because the woman at the well was fully and finally seen, known, and loved, she was able to take that power gained through that experience and take it to the people of her village. She was able to love the ones who had rejected her and love them wholeheartedly. She was able to show gratitude for the good work that was done through her and in her, and show that to the others. All while knowing that she, for the first time in her entire life, she knew that she was all enough, all on her own. Because of this radical experience of being embraced and embracing others in her brokenness and vulnerability, she was able to bring healing to her village, healing to the people around her, and actual salvation to all her people. Not through walls, not through protection, not through building up defenses and pretending we have these perfect lives, but always through vulnerability. And as the song that Dixie sang earlier said, you bring your brokenness and I'll bring mine. Let's pray.